Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for today's event for the Love of Birds, a virtual panel discussion on bird conservation and career pathways. We're going to be joined by some amazing professionals in the field of bird conservation. But before then, we're just going to give it another minute or two to let folks trickle in. And for those who are already tuning in, right to your right hand side, I believe, is a chat box. So we would love to get to know you a little bit while we're waiting. So feel free to drop your name, where you're tuning in from. And if our icebreaker for today is if you could be any bird or your favorite bird, if you could be any bird, which one would you be? Feel free to drop that in the chat and then we'll get started in just about another minute. Awesome. All right, folks, we are going to get started. Again, thanks everyone so much for tuning in for today's event for the Love of Birds, a virtual panel conversation about birding conservation and different career pathways. We'll be joined by some incredible guests. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier, feel free to get to know us. Let us know who you are by dropping your name in the chat, as well as where you're tuning in from, and if you can be any bird, which one would you be? Which one's your favorite? My name is Mel Mendez. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I am the New York City and Northeast Regional Coordinator for Latino Outdoors. I am an amateur birder. I just actually started through Latino Outdoors about a year or two ago. So my journey in this space is just starting, but I'm so excited to be joined by some incredible guests today. I reign from the lands of the Munse Lenape, also currently known as the Bronx, New York. And I would say my favorite bird that I can remember is, even though I just started, I would say back when I was younger, in Costa Rica, the national bird is the quetzal. And I just remember coming out of the forest after doing a trip and just kind of seeing it fly overhead. And I was just so overjoyed and shocked. And it's still a memory I think about today and hold dearly to my heart. So, hey, Deanna, love seeing folks chime in and let us know where you're tuning in from. Um, so today I'll be moderating today's panel, but I'll be joined by three amazing professionals in the birding conservation field. I'll let them introduce themselves, including, what their favorite bird is, but I'm also going to ask them as a part of their introduction if they can include just a quick, like one or two liner about some of the work that they're currently focusing on nowadays and, where their particular field, the different highlights of conservation work that they're focusing on nowadays. So I'm going to pass it on to Roslyn, and then we'll slowly but surely layer in the rest of the panelists today. So hey, Roslyn.
Hey, thanks so much, Mel. Hey, everyone. My name is Roslyn Rivas, pronoun she, her, and I'm also tuning in from the Bronx, New York City, traditionally Lenape land. Currently, I am the public programs manager at NYC Audubon. And I schedule and organize public events like bird outings, festivals, lectures, classes, workshops, which often involves working with partners and organizations. And I lead bird outings myself sometimes, so I'm a bird guide as well. One of my biggest priorities since I started working at NYC Audubon has been to make sure our programming is as accessible as possible for all. And despite living in a heavily urbanized area like New York City, we actually have quite a bit of green space. But it's not distributed equally among neighborhoods. And so I want to make sure we reach communities who don't have a lot of access to green space and offer programming that they may not have otherwise been exposed to. Also, I want to make sure we offer like programming that for bilingual speakers, like Spanish speakers, Mandarin speakers, events specifically with people with disabilities in mind, and etc. And favorite bird? Oh, the age-old question. So I've always been partial to ravens and crows, like corvids, because they're just so smart and so fun and funny and playful. Same with parrots, and they're so colorful, and I love that. So that's a bit on me, and I will pass it on to Hector.
Hey everyone, my name is Hector Cordero. My pronouns are he, him. I have a Spanish origin, but I've been living in New York for the last 7 years. I study biology and photography almost at the same time. And currently I combine my profession as scientist. I work also as a freelance conservation photographer and as a birding guide. So I do a bunch of things, leading tours like photography tours, bird watching tours, and I do my own conservation projects that I'm gonna explain later. In relation to this conservation project, I also published a book last spring about Central Park birds. And this book is also accessible to anyone to speak Spanish. There are two different editions, one that is full in Spanish and one that is full in English. So this is an incredible study that took me 4 years to put it together. I'm very excited about it. And also my favorite bird is a bird that we can see in New York. It's the American woodcock. It's so special for a number of reasons. And now I'm gonna pass the word to Sebastian.
Hey everyone, my name is Sebastian Moreno, pronouns he, él, and come from the unceded lands of the Potomac Nation, also in Western Massachusetts. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Massachusetts, where I study the intersections of people, birds, and urban areas, and how we can serve people to get them invested in their community and in the natural world, as well as making sure that we're making policy and management decisions that serve the birds so we can have them for generations to come. And my favorite bird is actually a tie between two birds. It is the eastern bluebird and the American kestrel. Yeah, and that's me. Looking forward to this space.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining today's panel. I'm super excited for the conversation we'll be having today. I know our work has kind of crossed paths, and I've been able to have different touch points with each of you in different capacities. And I think what I'm looking forward to so much today, and why we wanted to put this panel together, is to really showcase the myriad of different ways folks can be involved in conservation, and specifically supporting avian populations as well. I think so often we just think like, oh, if I wasn't a biologist specializing in birds or XYZ, then I can't get involved. And that's simply so far from the truth. And hopefully today will be an opportunity to really showcase that there's a wide range of ways that we can all get involved in bird conservation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about each of your journeys. And then for those who are just tuning in, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, feel free to use the chat box to your right-hand side. We'll feel free to drop in your questions, any comments or words of encouragement as we're going through today's panel. So I wanted to just set the context really quickly before we dive into some of our panelists' questions. It's, why are we hosting this event today? And I think, this week is special in two ways. First off, love is in the air. As we know, Wednesday is Valentine's Day, but maybe for some of us birders and conservationists, the weekend might seem a little bit more exciting. The weekend, this weekend, we're celebrating the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is a global event that happens every year, where birders, conservationists, and everyday nature lovers like you and I, where we kind of just go outside for just even 15 minutes out of your day to track, record, and identify birds in your area. And so this event happens every February, and it's hosted by Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the National Audubon Society, and Birds Canada. And the data that is crowdsourced is incredibly important for a variety of different works and projects, but overall, it really helps us globally better understand, protect, and track bird populations and biodiversity. So it's super important, and it's incredibly helpful and useful for folks, everyday folks who just want to ID and just be outside and connect with nature for a little bit. It's a really great opportunity to get involved. So with both of those events kind of happening back to back, we wanted to take a moment to talk about the importance and impact of bird conservation. And again, highlighting this work through a couple of different lenses and approaches as well. So whether that's recreationally, professionally, or academically, there's a host of different ways that, regular everyday folks like you and I can get involved in this work. So in order to understand a little bit more, I'm going to turn back to our panelists for the first question of the evening. So you've each shared a bit about the different areas of work that you all are focusing on, and all very, very different. And I'm, as we all know, none of this work happens. We're not here today overnight, right? This type of work takes time and energy to come into. So I just wanted to ask you all, what initially drew you into the field of conservation, and why specifically avian populations? So we'll go in reverse order to the introductions, and we'll start it off with Sebastian.
Yeah, thanks. So I actually did not start working with birds. So my journey started way off course. I was actually starting as a pharmacist major. I grew up in New York City. I had this preconceived notion that nature was not in my backyard. I wasn't surrounded by nature. So all the nature that I absorbed growing up was through TV. And then as I grew up, I realized I had a knack for the sciences. And I was like, I'm gonna be a doctor, like of medicine, because that's gonna make a lot of money. Really shallow goals, guys. It's like, yeah, I really wanted money. And then went to school for pharmacy, wasn't fitting in, wasn't meshing well, started hiking, started exploring nature, starting asking all these ecological like questions. And I spoke to a biology professor, and they're like, you ever consider taking a class in ecology? And I was like, don't know what that is. Sure. And started working in a lab. I worked with squirrels, realized squirrels terrified me. They have really big teeth, super scary. And then this other professor came up to me and was like, what about birds? I was like, what about birds? And he took me mist netting, and I caught a couple of birds. I held a bird in my hand, and that was it. That was as thematic as it can be. It was love at first sight, and I haven't looked back since. So flash forward 10 years later, here I am, really invested in birds and everything related to them. Yeah, Hector, what about you?
So in my case, I've been passionate about birds since I was a child. I grew up in the countryside. I spent like countless hours observing the birds, learning the behavior, and then when I grew up, I went to study biology. I studied biology, but back in the day there were no conservation programs or anything like that. So I was studying field biology, but nothing related to conservation or ornithology. But then the photography came to my wall, and then I started to take pictures just to show maybe the beauty of the birds. Of course, I love the birds, so this was the main thing when I started photography. I specialized in birds, but then at the same time, when I was out there in the field, I was feeling that I was aware of the issues that the birds were facing. I saw like so much problem they have, the things that are happening that they are facing in our world. Like at some point I say, oh, I have to document also that. I don't have to document only the beauty, but also the challenges that they have and if maybe we can do something to to make a better world for them. So I started using my camera as a tool to show what was happening, and this is like a different approach. It's to work on conservation. It's like visual storytelling, basically, and it's basically take not only a single picture of a wonderful bird, but a series of pictures that shows a story, that tells a story itself. And this is what I'm doing like right now for my conservation projects. It's like all about photo stories and documenting the different aspect, also the relation between the human and in the urban environments and the birds. And how about you, Roslyn?
Hey, yeah, it's so cool to hear your stories. So as I was mentioning before, I was born and raised in the Bronx, growing up right next to the Bronx Zoo. And I always like to say that that was my origin story, because I would visit the zoo like every other weekend when I was little. And that is where I fostered my love for nature and wildlife. That really was the thing that got me into loving that world. And I was always known as like the animal girl when I was growing up. So I used to carry an animal encyclopedia with me everywhere I went, watched Animal Planet religiously, of course. So I always knew I wanted to go into the conservation field. Um, uh, and so I majored in ecology and evolutionary biology in college. And then my first job out of college was actually here, still in the Bronx, at the New York Botanical Garden. I was the Index Herbariorum intern. So I worked in the herbarium. And then I went to National Audubon, and that is where I started professionally birding, or like really getting more into birds. And then after that, I left to do a grad certificate in wildlife management, and then finally ended up in NYC Audubon, where I am now. So I never specifically set out and haven't considered birds to be my thing, but I've always loved them. And when I was young, I would keep an observation chart of all the birds that I could see outside my window, like blue jays and cardinals were like the most exotic things I could remember seeing out my window. And I just found myself around birds a lot, and they're so accessible. They can be found everywhere. And so I feel like it's kind of hard not to be involved with birds at some point. When I was doing my grad certificate, for my capstone project, I actually did a project on birds in the Bronx, looking at species richness and abundance in different neighborhoods in the Bronx, depending on socioeconomic demographics. So I compared 3 neighborhoods, one that was majority white and wealthy, and 2 others that were majority POC and less wealthy in median household income. Also comparing central green space and distances away from it to see how richness and abundance compared in each neighborhood, because it's a known thing by now that wider, wealthier neighborhoods have more green space and therefore might have more biodiversity. So I wanted to put that to the test in the Bronx, and lo and behold, that's what I found. And so in white neighborhoods, they had like twice the number of bird species, and also like 3 times the size, the number, or 4 times the number of street tree species. So it was really interesting to just see that and apply that to my own, the place where I'm living. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And I think, even just like your quick testimonial, of course, this is not any sort of like recap of like an entire life's journey in this field, but I think it's clear to say that, it's not an overnight process. It's certainly not always linear. But for some reason or another, we're, I think, constantly told, I think, that this narrative that it is, you go from point A, then point B, then C, and then congrats, you're there, you made it. And I think these are really great examples of just showcasing that, in any career, but especially in the conservation and environmental spaces that are growing so so widely and quickly, especially within the past decade or so, that there's this significant ebb and flow of, the skill sets and talents that you acquire over that time and over life, but then also how you apply that and where your passions start intersecting with your profession as well, which is super exciting to kind of see how that layered in at different points throughout each of your lives. And so that really brings me to my next question. So, we talked about a lot of those exciting aha moments or sometimes fearful squirrel moments that, cause some pivots in our journeys. But what were some of the other challenges that you might have faced in your work? And conversely, what are some of the most rewarding aspects of being involved in bird conservation? So let's kick it over to Hector first, and then we'll do Sebastian and Roslyn.
Yeah, that's a great question, Mel. When it comes to photography, and especially wildlife photography or bird photography, the greatest challenge probably is the get funding. Also, like working on projects, monetize your work, because we are selling less and less picture every time. So we have to diversify our work, doing like workshops, doing talks, doing a bunch of things. So this is one of the struggles that we have. And also one important aspect is depending on the project, but for the project that I was doing in New York I was volunteering also with NYC Audubon for the bird collisions, monitoring bird collisions. A lot of people can't live with that. They suffer a lot. They are depressed when they see how many birds die every day with the buildings and so on. So this is also a great challenge. Some projects are very hard. It's a shock sometimes when you see the reality. On the other hand, the most rewarding part is to see how these conservation projects, one that they are completed, they are able to move the people, especially when you show it to parents or with kids or to younger generation. They maybe didn't know about it, but suddenly they say, "Oh wow, this is something that I should know, and now I can probably help the birds when I see them, and I can do it also in my hometown or in my neighborhood, because this is also happening." Some of the conservation projects are global, so are things that are happening everywhere. The plastic pollution is everywhere. The collisions are happening everywhere. So this is some projects have like a broad audience. Many people, even in New York City, they didn't know anything about it. So when I eventually released these photo stories and people congratulate me, I won a prestigious conservation award, call it Jose Antonio Valverde, that for a part of this project about the birds in New York. And this also gives me like a lot of visibility worldwide, and it's really amazing. This is one of the most rewarding parts. Of course, you have to be patient, but the rewards eventually are coming. So, and now I'm gonna give the word to I think Sebastian or Roslyn.
I think
Sebastian, you want to take it off? Perfect.
Yeah, this is a really good question. For me, a lot of my work revolves around social environmental justice. And part of that is putting part of my identity out there. So unlike other folks who can maybe separate their personal identities from their work, a lot of my identity goes into my work. And then talking to people about my lived experiences, what I've gone through, what I've seen other people that look like me, other people that were brought up like me go through, being rejected tends to not feel so good. So, being able to have this position to talk to folks of different walks of life, to give them kind of an insight of where I'm coming from, how I'm viewing life, how I view the birds, how I view nature, can be inversely really, really rewarding, because you kind of see that aha moment in their heads where they start connecting the dots and they start sympathizing with you, and they're like, I've never thought about it that way. I've never really considered it that way. When I put myself in your shoes, I can see how, being in nature can be uncomfortable, or how you've had a hard time connecting with nature, or have a hard time birding, alone. So yeah, I think for me, it's a good, but also a bad, where having those difficult conversations can sometimes be very difficult, but once we really connect, they're beautiful, because yeah, we move together on the same page, and it's like, I'm here to support you, you're here to support me. How do we support each other? How do we support each other when it comes to accessibility to nature? And how do we also together support the birds? Because at the end of the day, this is what we care about. Like, we have a mutual love for birds. Let's work together for all of us. Yeah, Roslyn.
Yeah, that is so true. And so yeah, like especially people of color, yeah, we are living, especially when we're passionate about this work, like we're living our experiences in this. I'd say in my job, so I plan a lot of programming for for the community of just communities all around the city, New York City. And I'd say one challenging thing is just making sure that I do the best job in advertising everywhere. So like when we have a certain event that has like a specific like target community, or like we would love like to make sure like people, if this neighborhood like come out, making sure that we do spread the word clearly and like as widely as we possibly can, because we can only make so many social media posters, post so many physical flyers, but so I'd say making sure, I mean, and you can never know like who actually saw the things and if it is of interest, but I'd say, yeah, just trying to get it out there, like, hey, yeah, there are these opportunities. If you were thinking of wanting to go out in nature, trying to reach those people who are looking for something, and make sure we didn't miss them, and I'd say, well, I especially love leading groups of beginning birders. They are, I'd say, just so in awe of everything we see because they've never had the experience before. And this may be the first time they're actually interacting with nature in this way. And who knows, that may be the thing to spark that lifelong passion in them. And kind of similar to what Hector said earlier, just seeing that somebody like enjoy their time in nature and with community too, because birding is not only about the birds, but kind of being with like fellow nature enthusiasts too, is the most rewarding thing. I just love when people can find like joy in that, and then experience that together and want to tell their friends or other people to join them as well next time.
I absolutely love all of your responses, like +1 to all of that. I think I've felt that even in my own journey in conservation, in birding, but just generally like, community programming and, bridging the outdoor equity gap. I think, you each touch on so many like salient challenges, I think, that we face, but also the joy of being in community. And so I really like, having this question, because I think so often, for those who are new in the field, or even those who, have been, in their career path for a long time, I think sometimes, we face these challenges and these moments where we feel like we're alone in the experience. And frankly, the bittersweet, point to that is that we're not, and that there are people in your corner who understand what's happening. And I think sometimes it's these moments where, a huge part of the work that we do is to introduce, amazing professionals like you all to our community, to, as a resource, as an opportunity, but also as a part of community reflection. And to say that, hey, like we all kind of share in a lot of these, and then that we all can contribute different solutions and lenses and viewpoints to addressing some of these challenges as well. So thank you all so much. And I think this brings me to the last question before we head into like the Q&A side of things. And that would be, kind of touching on a little bit of what you just said, Roslyn, about like, what does it look like when we introduce, this work to beginners, or, someone who's just transitioning into the field or something like that. What advice would you give to folks aspiring to enter the field of bird conservation, especially those from underrepresented communities? So we can loop back around. Roslyn, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, so something I love to say is that if you know what a bird is, you're a birder. So like no matter where you are, you'll probably see birds, and you don't need like $200 binoculars or to have such like in-depth knowledge about them all to start this like activity or this hobby. Or all you need is the curiosity to really just want to learn more. And so you can like even without leaving your home, you could probably start your conservation journey and just listening or seeing birds right outside your window, even if you live in a densely populated or urban area. And even if you don't know exactly what you want to do now, I'd say just keep at it, because I mentioned earlier that I've always known that I wanted to be in the conservation field, but it actually took me a while to figure out what exactly it was I wanted to do, because the biology field is so vast and I have many interests. So it took me a while to figure out like, well, which specific branch of biology, of wildlife biology, do I want to do? And since I have like all these different interests, and I didn't want to like box myself into one specific track, but a mentor of mine said once that no matter where you end up, like even if it's like studying just one specific species, you're going to gain transferable skills. So no matter what you're doing now, it will help you elsewhere. So like, let's say you're in an office job, well, you're learning a lot about probably communication, how to write well. And like, that's essential when it comes to like science communication. And when we are talking to others, trying to engage others and excite them about what we do. And there are so many of us out there, like you were saying, Mel, earlier, that I'm sure many of you have heard Black Birders Week or participated in events. We started in 2020, and it has only grown since then. And I was so floored by seeing how many fellow Black enthusiasts, nature enthusiasts, scientists, birders, like were in our community. And I was so pleasantly surprised to see like, oh yeah, there are so many out there. Like, I'm not the only one who is like that, even if like this may not be the field that a lot of us, like people of color, Black people, are in. There are still a lot of us out there and can always offer advice and offer their experiences as well. Oh, and I'm gonna pass it over to Hector. What do you think?
I'm gonna say the same thing that Roslyn said, but about photography. To get into photography and conservation photography, if you have a camera, you're already a photographer. And nowadays, everyone has a smartphone, so everyone can potentially become a conservation photographer. One important thing, perhaps the most important, is to know the 5W guideline. So the 5W guidelines is what is gonna be like your story about. So the first W is what is your story about? What is happening? What have you observed that deserves to be published? For example, in my conservation project about bird collision, there were like thousands of migratory birds that are hitting the glass and they die. So this was like the initial idea. So what's happening? And this is the starting idea. So the second W is where. Where is the story happening? Is this taking place in your neighborhood? Is this taking place in another city? You don't need to go to Antarctica to work on a conservation project. You can work on conservation project locally. And it's actually better, because if you work locally, you dedicate more time and your project eventually is going to be better because you spend more hours and you have more time to mature your project. That is an essential part of it, and create at the end a better story. I always try to work locally when I'm working on these conservation stories. So the third W is who. Who is affected? Who is the main character? Are there any secondary characters? Who is involved? There is any institutions? There are some people that are involved on this process, you should also take picture of this part. Don't only focus on the bird, focus on the whole thing. So you have to think about who is in the story, and you have to picture in the story. So in my case, I also photograph not only the birds that collide with the glass, but also the buildings, also the people, the volunteers that are picking the birds every morning and helping the ones that are injured, and the people who work on the rehab center in the rehab centers in different areas that are basically rehabilitating the birds that are injured. So the 4W is when. When is the story? When is this story happening? It's happening in a specific season, a specific time of the year. It's happening during the day. It's happening at night. So all this should be reflected on your photography. Also, for my conservation project, everything happened like around sunrise. Sometimes a little earlier, and sometimes a little after sunrise, but early in the morning. So I also have to put that on the story. And the last W is why. Why is this story important? Why the people should care about it? So is this conservation project strong enough? I mean, of course, you have different levels. You can work like professionally, or maybe you can just getting starting, and even a small project, a small issue that you are observing in your neighborhood deserves to be told. So don't be afraid. Just work on that. If you believe, if you have an idea, just follow that idea, and also be patient, because the story and all the conservation project, that they don't start from one day to another. It's like it's a slow growing curve that is going to be maybe bringing new ideas into you, maybe getting more people involved. Also, another advice that I give to the people that is starting is like maybe they can volunteer with some association that are already involved in some conservation project. For example, here NYC Audubon is doing a lot of works with many different conservation projects. So maybe you can volunteer with them, and then in this way you are going to learn much faster all the things that are happening, and it's going to help you with your visual storytelling. Also, you can work with different angles, because they usually, for example, NYC Audubon work a lot to change legislation, to launch like educational programs. So I, on the other side, work with the photo stories. I send them to photography competitions, to exhibition over the world. I have now one of the photos of this bird collision was shown in all over France, because it was in an international exhibition in touring in different cities of France. So everyone in different countries can be like aware of this particular issue outside of the reach that the NYC Audubon has, because NYC Audubon is mostly for New York and US, but with this international photography competition, I exhibit my work worldwide. So this is all complementary, and all are different paths to have the birds. And so I'm gonna also pass the word to Sebastian, that is gonna talk more about conservation in academia.
Yeah, thank you. I think first, I do want to echo what Roslyn and Hector said, and I do want to pull a couple of strings there. Challenging what is bird conservation first and foremost. Like, do we have this preconceived notion of bird conservation? Who is doing bird conservation? Where is bird conservation happening? I'll let you know, as someone who in academia who studies bird, who is constantly called a birder, a bird expert, I sometimes don't think of myself of a birder, because I don't go out birding a lot. My favorite type of birding is looking out my window and my bird feeders in my living room. That's my favorite type of birding. But that is birding at the end of the day. And also asking questions, like what Hector said. Ask the questions, but instead of in your photography, you're asking these questions, ask people these questions. When I first thought about doing this, I was so scared, so nervous, because I thought someone was going to be like, oh, you're so dumb. Why are you asking me all these questions? But what I would do is I would be like, hey, what's your job? What do you do? What's your day-to-day like? What's your work-life balance like? Do you get to travel? What kind of birds do you work with? Do you hold a lot of birds? Do you take pictures of a lot of birds? What's your research about? How do you do these things? Just how, why, where, when, just ask, ask, ask. And I see a lot of people in the chats asking, how do I get these internships? How do I get these opportunities? Sometimes in those questions, opportunities do present themselves. You're talking to someone very casually, Roslyn, how'd you get started in NYC Audubon? Where did you start? What was your education? What kind of outings do you do? Oh, I love doing those types of outings. And maybe Roslyn can be like, oh, well, you know what? We actually have this internship coming up. You would be a perfect candidate for it. You should apply. Or, maybe there's nothing, but in a couple of months, there's a position that opens up at NYC Audubon. And then Roslyn could be like, oh, you know who would be a good candidate for this job? This person that was talking to me several months ago. I should totally reach out to them. People are a lot nicer than we give them credit for. And people love talking about themselves. So if you can ask someone about their career, more times than not, they're going to be thrilled to talk about their career and how they got there and what they did. And, unsolicited advice, they're going to be like, oh, you should take this class, but don't take this class. Or if you're going to take this class, take it over here because it's way cheaper and it's saving me a ton of money. So yeah, just asking questions and really thinking about what is bird conservation, because it's a very vague term. And we're all doing it in some capacity, whether it's as a hobby, whether it's as a profession, we're all doing it.
Yeah. By the way, there are positions open at NYC Audubon if anyone's interested. I love all the shout outs. Thanks so much. Sebastian and Hector.
Are you hiring?
As we network within our own panels. Awesome. Thank you all so much. That was so insightful. And Sebastian, you kind of paved the next section perfectly. So we are going to conclude this kind of the panelist style conversation and then move into our audience Q&A. And we have a couple of really great questions from the audience. I might throw in a surprise one here depending on time. But I wanted to take this time for you all, the panelists. I'll post some of the questions here that we've kind of expounded on and things like that. And feel free to jump in. There's not going to be an order. So jump in if you think you have a response that you'd like to share. Or I also want to give you the space and grace to decide hey, actually, I'll sit this one out or I'll pass this along. I think it's been answered well already by, our fellow panelists. So totally up to you. And so we'll get started with our first question here, which is, this is kind of a continuation from what Sebastian started answering. For those interested in pursuing a career in bird conservation, are there specific educational pathways, certifications, or internships that you recommend? So maybe some specific either courses, classes, universities, or organizations that they should reach out to for possible internships.
So Sebastian, do you have something or?
Yeah, from an academic standpoint, unsolicited advice maybe, but I went to a very small private school and I felt like that limited the connections that we had and the access to conservation at large. So I recommend going to a bigger school, a school that is very integrated in conservation. If it's a small school, make sure that they specialize in this stuff. The school that I went to, it didn't really have a ecology field. I think I was one of 2 students. So we really were out there fighting for ourselves. But currently at the school that I'm in right now, it's a much bigger school. We have collaboration with the Fish and Wildlife Service, with the USGS, a lot of big federal and nonprofit organizations that work in conservation. So it's easier for us to go from school to potentially getting an internship or being employed by these agencies. Or at the very least, there's someone that can speak on your behalf if you ever need a letter of recommendation or something. But yeah, always be looking, always be asking questions. I think that's my advice.
Yeah. I'll jump on that. So I'd say a bachelor's degree in a related field is your first step, probably. Like, I mean, in my case, I got a Bachelor of Science in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. And while it may not be absolutely necessary in your career in the conservation field to get a master's, it probably would help. But I mean, of course, that's like a very privileged thing, like to say and to get, because like, like not everyone can afford that. And I am aiming to get my master's. I was planning to, but it was right when the height of the pandemic happened, and so no one was taking students, and everything got pushed back. So I ended up pausing those plans. But I feel like my saving grace was the graduate certificate program that I found in Oregon State University, and it was a completely remote program. So I didn't have to leave home, which was very convenient, and that was it's a great way. I felt like I learned so much and like a deeper knowledge of within the field, and it was really good. And it kind of it can help actually towards your master's if you complete in this specific program. If you complete your master's within a certain time frame, that those credits can help you with a master's. So if anybody's interested in that, it's really cool. It's called the Graduate Certificate in Wildlife Management in Oregon State University. I got my undergraduate degree from Yale, but they have the School of Forestry, which is really cool. I didn't go to specific classes from there, but that kind of institution, like, it's very very focused on environmental related fields. And a lot of federal organizations, like Sebastian like touched on this, will have probably ways or internships that are available, or even specific scholarships for like, let's say, like Latin American people or Black students or whatnot. And they I wish I could give you a specific example right now, but I remember seeing one, and or a couple at least, where you might qualify for getting certain scholarships or certain internships, and that could really help you along your career. If I find it, I'll put it in the chat.
So I can talk about the grants or fellowship that you can get using images or working on visual storytelling. Probably one of the most famous is like National Geographic grants. They have several types of grants according to different style of projects, and these grants also cover. It's not like you don't need to be a professional photographer. You can have the camera you have, and the most important thing is the idea. And they also are giving a lot of priority to underrepresented minorities or underrepresented people, or people that is in a very local community that have an issue that no one else talk about it, and maybe they hear about it and they, oh, this is a wonderful idea, and we didn't even hear about it. So they get funded this project, and this is also a good idea. They have also plenty of free courses to learn more about the storytelling and get the right skills to work on a conservation project or using photography. So this is one of the things that you might take a look if you are interested in conservation photography. Definitely, I applied for one of those for this particular project.
This is so awesome. Thank you all so much. I think. Go ahead, Sebastian. I saw you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because we were talking a lot about academia, and I know that school academia and higher levels of education is a privilege itself. But one thing that I didn't do that I wish I did is make sure you have a community, make sure you have cheerleaders, make sure you're your best cheerleader. I say that as someone who is a child of immigrants, as someone who is getting the first to get a higher level of education in the family. So there's a lot of unknowns, and it's a lot of scary steps happening. And I don't think it would have been possible if it wasn't for my community. and my cheerleaders and me hyping myself up and being like, I can do this, I can do this, because we live in a society and a system where a lot of people are going to tell you you can't do this and you shouldn't do this. So if you start hearing that and listening to it and taking it to heart, you won't be able to. And there's a lot of stats out there that tell us about how little Black and brown people are in these fields and stuff. So just hype yourself up. And, you know, if you're going to do something, you're gonna be like, I know I can't do this, because there's gonna be a lot of people out there saying that you shouldn't, and you don't want to, but if you do want to, go for it.
Absolutely. Second that emotion for sure. Awesome. Okay, so just to close out, we'll do one more Q&A. We had a really great question thrown here into the chat. And also, I just want to direct folks to the chat. There's a lot of really great resources that folks have been linking to in response to some of the feedback and panelists' advice that we've been getting. So it's a wealth of knowledge here. And to Sebastian's point, creating a community here. That is what we're trying to do, and really trying to share those resources and break down that barrier, whether it's through academia, professionally, through the arts. It's there. Everyone has a role that they can play in conservation, and it's just a matter of like finding your right fit. And it certainly is possible, and just finding, you know, just being a part of conversations and communities that can encourage you or inspire you to, you know, move and move. You know, I like to say with like a little bit of risk too, without that fear of falling, because we'll all fall and it's okay, but you'll get back up, and a huge part of that has to do with your community too. So a great reminder. All right, so the last question here, and we'll end the panel with this. How can we encourage more DEIJ efforts in bird conservation and in orgs that support communities that love birds and birding?
I can start with that. So we want to, like, especially in being in these kinds of groups, we want to be able to engage everyone and open up a space for all. So we need to work with like-minded local groups that are already doing that kind of work and centering marginalized groups like the Feminist Bird Club, for example, or Outdoor Afro, Queer Birders NYC, Latino Outdoors, of course, just to name a few. So I feel like it might feel very daunting to be like, oh, well, how do I start this whole thing? But it's like, oh, a lot of the work has already been done and can be just added upon. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. And honestly, getting out there, having a good time, like birding, just being out in nature, is making an impact. The more someone is exposed to something, and in this case, birds and nature, the more you're likely to care about it. And then you'll probably be that thing for someone else to be like, oh, wait a minute, like, there are other like Latinx people enjoying nature, enjoying hiking, enjoying just being out there birding. So you can have that impact to someone else, and it can be contagious, and then it just produces an effect. And then and with that exposure comes a want to be a part of the conservation movement. Yeah.
So in my case, I basically like try to do bird walks or birding tours for everyone. Even if I have one person, every person, for this person can be the best experience and can maybe change life or her life. Or so I try to do like try to get everyone that is interested, even if it's one person or two person, I don't mind. I spend the time with them. I show them and teach them all I know, and they are usually very happy about it. I also, for the Latino community, I also do the tours in Spanish. I was doing a tour actually 2 weeks ago with Latino Outdoors, fully in Spanish. The book is also have the 2 versions, so I try to work on that as much as I can.
Yeah, and I guess trying to answer that from a different perspective, if you are a part of an organization that wants to do DEIJ efforts in bird conservation, and how do you get your peers and your coworkers to do that? I think starting with checking yourselves and your privileges and your powers and what powers you hold in different spaces, and how you can then pass the mic to someone else. I always hear like DEIJ is, building a table and bringing people in. But if you're the person in power and you're building the table, isn't it still your table? So like, why don't you, if you have the resources and the tools to build a table, why don't you give those resources and tools to the community so they can build a table, and then you can take a chair at that table that was built with your help by the community. So yeah, really just checking yourselves and your powers and your privileges and what powers you have in certain spaces. I mean, yes, I am a person of color and I am a marginalized member in that sense, but I'm also a male, and being a male in this society has a lot of power and a lot of privilege. So how do I use that power and privilege I have as a male to help women of color? Those are questions that I ask myself and I ask my peers around me. It's like, how do we use our privileges to support those that may not have the voice or power to do so?
Yeah, exactly. I just want to echo what Sebastian said, and like, just really, yeah, like it has to come like from the community. Like, and like when you're in an organization, it's not like yes, you have the resources now to like maybe spread it to other people, but it can't be that like, oh well, here, take it, like I'm just gonna like drop this in this community and just expect you to want to do it, and then not without any kind of consideration of like, well, am I actually communicating in a respectful and inclusive way? Like, am I just like waiting for them to just, or like telling them to do this instead of seeing if there is actual interest in like the programming that we're doing or whatnot. Yeah, so I very much like respect that too, and want to make sure, yeah, like people know that this is not a top down kind of thing. Like we need to, as a community in total, like, yeah, really lift each other up like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Thanks for those tuning in, for joining and sticking with us. Thank you so much to our panelists today for sharing their expertise. For those tuning in who might have tuned in a little bit later or interested in sharing this conversation, immediately following the conclusion of this event, it'll be posted automatically to Latino Outdoors' social media channels. So you'll be able to share that off with your friends and family. And again, I actually just wanted to take a second to love on our panelists for a little bit. Roslyn, we have been working with you and our New York City chapter of Latino Outdoors for years, and it's been so inspiring. And thank you so much for helping us secure grants and even introduce us to some amazing BIPOC guides, which leads me to Hector. Thank you for being one of those guides with our chapter and for helping us lead our first all Spanish birding event, which had so many signups until we got like a hailstorm on us. And Hector was not lying. He led that event regardless. We just had a handful of people show up at the end of the day, and it still turned out super, super beautiful. And Sebastian is also an LO leader, a volunteer leader as well for the Western Massachusetts chapter, sharing incredible community building work and opportunities in the avian sector, but also just in outdoor recreation overall. So just thank you all so much for the beautiful work that you contribute, and just thank you for your time today and just adding to that, because I think, each of you have touched on this in your own different way, but I think it takes a community to build a community and to grow a community and to grow an equitable community as well. And that's really what we're trying to do, and build that exposure and inspiration as well. So thank you to all of you for joining, and we'll see you soon, hopefully at one of our events. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mel.
Thanks so much for having me.
Gracias.
Sí, muchísimas gracias a todos.